You won't believe what happened when Jaleel White, best known as the iconic Steve Urkel, sat down for what was supposed to be a simple psychic reading. What started off as a lighthearted, even skeptical session quickly spiraled into something deeply personal and utterly shocking. The psychic began revealing details no one outside Jaleel's inner circle could possibly know, but then the energy in the room shifted. The reading took a dark, emotional turn, one that left Jaleel visibly shaken. As spirits from the past were mentioned and a chilling message surfaced, even the crew behind the scenes fell silent. Was it just coincidence? Or had something from Jaleel's past finally come back to the surface? In this video, we're breaking down the moment that left the Family Matters star stunned and the message that might change how you see him forever. He walked in with curiosity, but left shaken to his core. Jaleel White, the actor forever etched into pop culture as Steve Urkel, sat down with Hollywood's most famous medium, Tyler Henry, just hoping for a quiet connection to his past. But what unfolded was anything but ordinary. At first, it felt like a typical reading until Tyler began mentioning letters, ELNE. The room froze. Jaleel's face dropped, his eyes widened. In a tone that shifted everything, he asked, "Did you Google this beforehand?" The atmosphere turned heavy, tense. Tyler, stunned, insisted he hadn't done any research, but Jaleel wasn't so sure because the name meant something too personal, too real. And then, the moment that changed everything, Tyler described a presence, a woman, radiant, warm, and unmistakably tied to Jaleel's soul. That's when emotion cracked through his voice. He didn't want to believe it, but something in him knew. This wasn't just entertainment anymore. This was a spiritual encounter. What followed was a flood of memories, confessions, and truths Jaleel had never shared publicly. In this video, we uncover what really happened in that psychic reading, why Jaleel White couldn't shake it off, and the message that may have come from beyond the grave. When Henry finally said the word September, White's heart skipped a beat, and his emotions began to overflow. At that point, he finally said it aloud. "You're talking about Michelle Thomas." The name alone was enough to bring back all the memories of laughter, long days on the set of Family Matters, inside jokes, and their close relationship. White's breathing became unsteady, but it was obvious he already had a name in mind. Friendship came flooding back, but this is where the narrative takes a more profound turn. Beyond being White's co-star, Michelle Thomas was much more. She played Myra Monkhouse, Steve Carell's eccentric L-shaped girlfriend on the show, but off-screen, she was a close friend that White loved. Michelle was a bright spot in everyone's life, talented and joyful, but in 1997, when she was only 9 years old, she was diagnosed with a rare and aggressive form of stomach cancer. The stunning news: she was young, healthy, and had a lot of life left to live. But this illness didn't care. It spread quickly, and before anyone knew it, her life had changed forever. Now, as White sat in front of Tyler Henry, all of these painful memories returned to him. He tried to contain them, but his voice broke. "She was my co-star, my family," he said, and the pain was still fresh even after all these years. He recalled how quickly her health deteriorated, how helpless everyone felt watching her suffer, but the most tragic part was that she never. The session was about reliving a tragic loss that had plagued White for decades. But Henry's next revelation was something no one anticipated, and that's where things get even more shocking. However, just when White thought he had heard everything, Henry said something that made him feel completely free. He wasn't just talking about Michelle in general. Michelle lost her spirit even in her darkest days, but she remained the same kind-hearted, loving person she had always been. Mentioned a particular instance, a final farewell in a hospital room during a period of intense melancholy. White's eyes were watering, and his hands were squeezed together. This was becoming too real. He hadn't talked about this experience in years, but now it was being revealed to him like a book. He was tormented by Michelle's last days. She had always been vibrant, always smiling, and a delight to everyone around her. But when the illness took control, everything changed so quickly that White had gone to see her in the hospital in the hopes that see the same vibrant, content Michelle he had known for years. But instead, he discovered someone who was barely surviving. She was weak, her body was frail, but her eyes still had that warmth he had seen every day on set. Seeing her like that made him feel helpless. He wanted to tell her how much she meant to him, but words could never express how much she meant to him. And before he knew it, she was gone. Henry continued to channel his vision, and he described something even stranger. Michelle's energy felt calm, as though she wanted White to know she was all right. White exhaled deeply, unsure of what to believe, Was it a coincidence? Or was Michelle reaching out? Then Henry said something that made the room fall silent. She wanted you to know that she never blamed you. Wyatt's whole body tensed up, and he blamed him for the guilt that washed over him. Was Michelle sending him a message? Was there something he had carried for years without realizing it? Wyatt leaned back, rubbing his hands over his face. He realized that this was more than just an interview. It was personal. He had spent a lot of time trying to move on and preserve Michelle's memory in a positive way, but he had always secretly regretted something. That he had not spent more time with her when she was ill, and that he had not told her how much she meant to him. Hearing Henry say these words made everything hit him at once. But this is where things get interesting. Henry went on to say, Michelle's spirit wasn't only there to make people miserable, she also intended to remind Wyatt of something significant regarding a certain date. When Henry stated it, Wyatt's eyes furrowed because he didn't understand what he was talking about. Wyatt's jaw dropped when he realized that it was Michelle's birthday on September 23. How could he have known that this wasn't a well-known fact that anyone could just guess? Wyatt felt something that he couldn't explain at that moment. He had carried the pain of losing Michelle for years, but now he was sitting in that chair. He felt something change when he heard Henry talk. It was almost like she was there with him for the first time in decades. Was it real, or was it just an illusion? Wyatt didn't know, but one thing was for sure, this was a moment he would never forget. And just when he thought the emotions couldn't get any stronger, Henry revealed something even more shocking that completely altered the way he saw everything. But this is where it gets even stranger. Just when Wyatt thought he had processed everything, he dropped another. He had a revelation that left him stunned. At first, Wyatt didn't understand music and wondered how it related to Michelle, but then it dawned on him. As the daughter of Dennis Thomas, the renowned jazz musician from Kool and the Gang, Michelle Thomas was more than just an actor. Music had always played a significant role in her life. Henry explained an image. Michelle was surrounded by music, with a particularly meaningful song playing. As Wyatt's breathing became labored, he realized that Henry was referring to Michelle's last days, when music was one of the sole things that provided her with solace. She would close her eyes and listen even when she was too weak to speak. Why did he remember going to see her in the hospital? He didn't realize it at the time, but that moment would always be with him. He had never discussed this in public. How could Henry have known that the room fell silent? Wyatt's face displayed every emotion: shock, sadness, disbelief. This was becoming too real, but this is where it gets even more heartbreaking. Henry remained focused into his vision, stated, Michelle wanted Wyatt to know about the last time they spoke, and his mind raced back to that last conversation. It was brief, just a few words, but it had stuck with him ever since. He recalled how she looked at him and tried to smile despite her pain, and then she said something so simple yet so powerful, take care of yourself. At the time, he didn't give it much thought because he thought they would have more time. But now that he thinks about it, he realizes the craziest part was when she realized she didn't have much time to live. Wyatt's whole body ached with guilt when Henry, still channeling Michelle's energy, said, she wants you to stop carrying the guilt. He had spent years questioning whether he had done enough for her, whether he had been there for her the way he should have, and whether he had told her everything he needed to before it was too late. Now that Henry was saying that Michelle never wanted him to feel that way, Wyatt was unable to control his emotions any longer and wiped his face, attempting to gather his thoughts. This session had developed into something far more profound than he had anticipated, but it gets even more amazing from here. Henry said that Michelle wasn't merely communicating with white people. Rather, she was sending a sign that white people would understand as a means of letting him know she was still present and still feeling emotional. He inquired what the sign was. After a little pause, Henry said something that astounded him. A butterfly. Wyatt's head lifted, his eyes widened, and he was at a loss for words because no one else knew this. Michelle Wyatt had always loved butterflies. It was something small and intimate, but it was real, and he felt a sense of peace that he hadn't felt in a long time. Perhaps this was more than just a chance encounter. Perhaps Michelle was still with him in some capacity. But just when Wyatt thought the feelings couldn't go any deeper, Henry said something that changed everything. It was about a secret that Michelle had never told him before. And what Henry revealed next then, just when Wyatt thought he had heard everything, Henry revealed something that completely altered his perspective on Michelle's death. He mentioned a secret that Michelle had never shared with Wyatt while she was alive, and Wyatt leaned forward with his hands clasped tightly. He wasn't sure if he was prepared for this, but he couldn't turn away. Henry took a deep breath and said, "She didn't want you to see her in pain." White froze, his lips slightly parted, but no, the words came out, and the weight of them hit him like a ton of bricks. He remembered the last few weeks of Michelle's life, when she had stopped answering some calls and had asked friends to visit her less frequently. At the time, he didn't question it, assuming she simply needed rest. But now that he knew this, everything made sense. She had been protecting him, and Henry added something even more tragic. She believed that seeing her in that manner would alter your memory of her, and Wyatt's face fell. No matter how hard he tried to recall the good times, the laughter, the fun on set, and the way she used to make everyone smile, the image of Michelle in that hospital bed would always push its way to the forefront of his mind. Now Henry was telling him that Michelle knew this would happen and that she had tried to shield him from it, but in the end, he had carried the pain anyway. But this is the part that changed everything. Henry said Michelle wanted him to wiped his eyes and took deep breaths to try to steady himself. He had spent so many years feeling as though he had lost a piece of himself when Michelle passed away, but now, for the first time in decades, he felt something different. He felt peace. Then, in a final eerie moment, Henry looked at White and said, "She's always been with you, and she always will be." He finally let go of her memory, but not of the sadness, guilt, or regret. She wanted him to celebrate her life, not mourn it forever. White nodded and closed his eyes. He wasn't sure if he genuinely thought that psychics or spirits existed, but he was certain that this experience had changed him. Perhaps it was real, or perhaps it was just a strange coincidence. But he felt more connected to Michelle than he had in years. White took to social media after the session, still trying to comprehend what had happened, tweeting, "I don't know what to say, that was unbelievable." Michelle Thomas is still a beloved figure in television history. Her role as Myra Monkhouse is still cherished by Family Matters fans, and her presence on The Cosby Show is remembered with warmth. However, those who knew her personally continued to speak of her kindness, light, and the joy she brought into every room for Jal White. This experience wasn't just about a psychic reading, it was about finding closure. It was about realizing that Michelle's memory wasn't something to grieve, but rather something to cherish, and perhaps she had never truly left at all.